Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Frederick Meyer with Writers.com, and I'm really happy to see you all for this poetry reading and Q&A on In Another Country with Andrea Jurjević. Just a little bit about Andrea. She is the author of two poetry collections, In Another Country, selected by Roberto Tejada for the 2022 Saturnalia Books Prize, as well as Small Crimes in 2017, selected for the 2015 Philip Levine Prize and for the 2018 Georgia Author of the Year Award. Her chapbook Night Call was selected for the Acme Poem Company Surrealist Poetry Series. Her book-length translations from Croatian include Mama Safari from 2019 and Dead Letter Office 2020, which was shortlisted for the 2021 National Translation Award in Poetry. Andrea's work has appeared or is forthcoming in The Believer, Tri-Quarterly, The Missouri Review, Crazy Horse, and The New Republic, among many others. She is the recipient of a Robinson Jeffers Tour Prize, a Tennessee Williams Scholarship from the Sewanee Writers Conference, and a Hambridge Fellowship. Okay, you're going to have to help me say the town that you're a native from, would you please? So I'm going to say right up until it and you say it. Andrea is a native of
Rijeka.
Rijeka. And can you say Croatia, how it's actually said?
Hrvatska.
Oh, wow. Okay, I'm not even going to try that one. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia, nailed that one, where she teaches in the English department at Georgia State University. So, and then just a little bit about In Another Country, the book, the newly released book, Andrea, that you'll be reading from. Anchored by desire to find a home in a place of in-betweenness among cultures, languages, and identities, In Another Country reflects on war and memory, death and art, love and desire, and the immigrant experience. Okay, Andrea, so I'd love to let you read as many poems as you'd like from In Another Country, and then we'll have some time at the end of our hour for a Q&A. So if you have questions, please get them ready and we'll call on you towards the end of the hour, or you can submit your questions in chat, but please leave your questions until after the reading. Okay, thank you.
Hi, thank you, Fred and Sean, for organizing the reading, and thank everybody in the audience behind the screens. I really appreciate you taking time out of your Friday evening. I will be reading, as Fred said, from In Another Country, which the official publication date is today. So this is a really special day for the book. And I will be reading 10 poems. That's the plan, unless I change my mind. But it should be 10, so you can be counting down together with me. And I will start with the first poem in the collection, which is titled Nastic Movements. And when I first wrote this poem, I actually learned the word Nastic for the first time, and you probably all know what it means, but for me it was a new word that described the opening movement of flowers that open up when the sunlight comes up. And I thought that was so cool. So yeah, that's what the poem was initially inspired by, but of course it ends up going into a lot of different directions. Nastic movements. Sweetness. Back home, the Adriatic tightens around the shore like a snake around a hot rock. In each house on the island, there is a table. On every table, a loaf, round as a Slavic face. Ashes in the oven. Ashes on the domes of the bread. Ashes on the roof of one's mouth. Last year, my cousin offed himself in his home, and our family, scattered around the world, got caught in a phone web. Catching up with each other, we forgot his body. Things were funny. Phone in hand, someone picked her nose and pulled out a bloody fingernail. Another drew a tough, tar-black hair from between her teeth, a pubic curl, and wondered whose it was. Listen, in Sarajevo, the fit ones ran through the sniper alley. The rest took up dying. Longing is a trick, baby. Go inside a rock, a ringtone, the red coal of my tongue, and you'll only taste yourself. Babe, keep the curtains parted. See the moon tossing her long white hair across the ocean. Hear its steady, back arcing roar. Look at the chenilled strip of black sand, that fool walking with a flashlight. Listen to the ocean, and you'll come apart like a love letter in rain. Sweetness, even dandelions lose their heads at night. A good few poems in this collection came from memory. And it sometimes feel as if we sort of, like, memories live within our bodies, and certain sensations that remain with us. And this one came from memory of being a child, and some of the children that I went to school with. So my classmates' fathers worked abroad in Germany as what we then called Gastarbeiters, which meant manual laborers. And after World War II, there were a lot of people from former Yugoslavia, Turkey, and other places who went to work in Germany. And the reason why I bring this up is that I kind of envied those kids for a very childish reason, and that is that their fathers would come home and then bring really fancy candy, and all we had to was, basic chewing gum, white chewing gum sticks, none of the colorful, flavorful candy that they had. So we kind of got creative with making our own candy more exciting, so that it looks like the fancy German candy. And what we would do, we would take the simple chewing gum, white one, and take a coloring pencil and just bite the tip of that coloring pencil into the chewing gum, and just it would explode with color, right? So that's basically in response to that memory. And I titled the poem "In the Color Grinding Years." In the pre-war and in the post-war, we made colors, usually in the school bathroom, between classes, a swarm of girls crowding graffiti-covered walls, and some of us entered the narrow stalls in pairs, one pulling jeans down to her knees, her shirt a wrinkled valance over her snatch, babbling as she eased herself off, the thin piss streaming down the porcelain bowl, while the other, cigarette between her lips, added to the wall art. Don't pour confidence into me, I'll drown. Others, by the sink, bit waxy tips off colored pencils, crushed them into the pale stick of chewing gum, torching it into something bright, explosive, reckless. Between teeth, the meat red pigment in the flesh of the gum blossomed into a striped carnation. A green nib bust into a spiky horse chestnut. Meanwhile, our mothers picked stones out of green coffee beans and dyed our clothing in soup pots. In those years, we had a case of color madness, busied ourselves concealing our featherless void until everything was disco fresh, all was sunny forsythia, foxy foxglove, the provocative purple of sage, lilac, blue lilac. God, lilac so blue. It's the one color I still notice, mouth still watering. And the following one is titled Summer's End. And the title came from the song. Where is it? And it's also based on a memory, a family memory of growing up on the Adriatic. My father was very much, how would I say, he loved the body. He was a nudist. So what he would do, he would he would take the whole family to the nudist beach. And there were a lot of other families there. So that was kind of one of the things we did as a family. Summer's End. This morning, the light wears its finest colors of diminishment, riding against electric blue streaks of roadside thistle and violet sky. Such citizenry of in-betweenness. Like when you take Mama, Eva, and me to the nudist beach, we'd sink a fat watermelon into the cold underbelly of the sea, and for hours busied ourselves turning into fish, sipping the sun. Mama perched on a rock, thighs pockmarked, your tan finger tracing her long collarbone. Maria, you'd call her. Then, in a spiral head-first dive blast the billowing silver waves, where Eva and I, your two swift torpedoes, still practice launching our bodies, and you keep swimming. And even though this poem recalls this memory of going swimming and going to being at the beach, it was initially triggered by an anniversary of my dad's death. He died unexpectedly when I was a teenager in September. And you know, that end of the summer kind of quality of light always makes me think of him and the time we had together. I'm so sorry. I'm going to follow with another poem that was inspired partially by, you know, a person passing. But these are good memories. This was in memory of my grandmother, my dad's mother. So when I say Nona, you probably will all know I'm talking about my grandma. La comparsita for Nona. Her skin is delicate, like the ornaments on the tree. They say her womb is an abandoned gill net drifting below the surface, its tendrils teeming with caught fish. The black lace dress she will wear for her own funeral hangs on the back of the door. By her bed, the ironing board on its rear legs holds the IV bag like a mannequin with a purse. It's New Year's Eve, and the neighbor is watching reruns of old movies. I have just turned 10, and I hold Eva's little hand. Nona doesn't recognize us anymore. Dad is pale, his mustache stark like carbon paper. It's too late to pretend to be alive. Back home, I slip into Mom's black baby doll draping the footboard and pull her silk stockings over my arms. Eva puts on her jewelry and lace-up heels. We are Daphne and Osgood, and we practice the tango. I kind of love the way children have the ability to, even in moments of loss and sadness, get lost in the imagined spaces. My first collection, Small Crimes, dealt a good bit with the topic of war, the wars in the 90s in former Yugoslavia and Croatia and Bosnia, but also World War II. My maternal grandmother lost her entire first family in that war, 4 sons and her first husband. And so, I don't know, growing up, the war was always part of the, how would I say, the air. You don't have to go very far. There is a memorial here and there, so many stories. And since I have left home, you know, I always, how would I say, I listen closely. I can't not think about stuff like that. But in particular, the sort of after effects of the war in Bosnia. And when I wrote the poem that I'm about to read, I wrote it 25 years late after Srebrenica happened in Bosnia, which was in July 13th, I believe, 1993, when about 8,000 Bosnian Muslim boys and men were killed and then thrown into mass graves and then moved around. So what happened, and what kind of has been really interesting to me, is that since then there are still thousands of families who are looking for the remains of their loved ones who have not been found or identified, and so on. And actually, the forensics have developed a lot based on all the work that's been going on in Bosnia. But there was this one man in particular, and I think he passed away a couple of years ago. I believe he was nicknamed the Bosnian Bone Hunter. I can't remember exactly, but he lost some family members, and what he in Bosnia is very wooded and hilly and just full of nature. So what he would do, or what he did until his death, is that every day he would go on these really long walks in the woods and basically comb the forest floor looking for remains. And he actually helped find a lot of bits and pieces that ended up being helpful in identifying people's bodies. So this poem, even though it kind of has sad origins, I think it was mostly inspired by his commitment to do this. He was just such an impressive person, and he was interviewed a good bit across the media. I don't mention him directly, but he was on my mind when I was writing this. Personal effect. 2 decades later, the dirt is still sifted in search of folks who failed to escape the beatings. Bulldozers pushing their emaciated bodies into ditches. Those who couldn't flee their own neighbors, cleansing their land of outsiders, the prey. At first, the ground gave clothed skeletons, a rare pair of feet, still in socks, toes, and all. Then clothing, a sky blue tracksuit, dirt black scraps of home knit sweaters, ransacked bags, a Quran, the wind flapping its pages, perhaps a toothbrush, a medical card, a rusted Swiss knife, a photo of a man with a clear face, a shoe half sunk in dirt, ants crawling over it, a spoon, a shirt placket, ligatures caked with mud, scraped blindfolds. All across the valley between the hillside pastures, their lime white farmhouses, and into the woods, where as kids they used to play, where they knew every tree, the narrow path where they were hunted down. There might still be a lighter, a jaw bright with moss, a rib, a phalanx. It's difficult to find the skulls these days, to stop combing the forest floor, to let go of crumbs of clay. Some say it's even harder to dig oneself out of the country erasing itself. So we're about halfway through, if that's okay. Is everybody holding up? We're going to change places and terrains a little bit, and the following poem, let me just pull it up quickly, is titled Black Daisies. It has a little epigraph by Charles Baudelaire, It's Time to Get Drunk. It takes place in the American desert. And, you know, I was a little petty when I was when I picked this epigraph because the poem was initially sort of written for somebody who I was in a relationship with, who was sober, and then that did not turn out well. And so I was like, okay, let me let me put this epigraph, but I think it makes sense. Black daisies. We're inside the barrel of a heat wave, this abstinent American and I. The earth, the sky, the strange Nevada sun blazing in between. A tattooed river courses up his pale forearm, a mustached koi threads upstream, the fish rendered separate from its world. Across the table, hopeless Jack slings ice cubes down the canyon of his mouth, crushes them with a metallic tang, and says, I've been sober for over a decade and I still can't sit still. The roof vent exhales a steamy breath. The sun glares out through the ground. I've spent my life in badly lit rooms, and the only thing this brightness reminds me of is my cousin kneeling in the wooden confessional in front of the delirious light of God pouring in through the latticed partition, and him letting out a loud, wet fart. It's sitting in light we can't do. The heat is just a bitter oleander, desert thrift. A clod of dirt you're starting to feel like, and there is nothing you can do about it but wish for a spit of rain. Though now I want a narrow vase with black daisies in front of me. Not a lush flower bed or a shadowy bank pearled with dew, just a spray of black daisies, curving like script over uncomplaining earth, or crotch hair shy curling into its own heat. Little wicks drawing fuel to the flame. I want a wet, light-absorbing language, a crawling, heat-converting argot, and I want to drink it like liquor. I love it how we can, poetry lets us kind of take take some of the most heartbreaking and frustrating and upsetting experiences and then just kind of like make something pretty out of them, or attempt to. Epithalamium, which I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing the word correctly, is usually a poem that is read and then performed at weddings. But this wedding kind of did not really go the way it was supposed to. Epithalamium. Instead of the wedding, weather took place. That landless squatter moved into your bones, built its house in one night. The ocean pulled back its white scalloped lace. The thin keels of ships snapped like broken spine. The seabed sunk, the sky heaved into it. Magpipes strutted a stiff guard-like swagger. All the bread loaves lay upside down, and crows wandered in wide circles. That midnight of our second year, every broken thing was washed away, a kind of eviction. The sky, the land, the ocean, and its endless fitful rocking, falling, roiling, until there was nothing, not even air, or those thrashing voices of ours drowning like a litter of kittens. And by the way, this drowning litter of kittens, that's a line that I totally stole from my mom. I don't I don't know which context she used it, but I kind of always like the image of it. So I just took it from her. Nocturne with Burning Morana. You might have heard the name Morana before. She was a Slavic goddess that was frequently associated with death and rebirth and dreams and all that kind of yummy stuff. So, Nocturne with Burning Morana. This is the year the walls are filled with dull scratching, rooms drafty. And at night, a rat shits on the couch, droppings greasy like nougat. This is the year you sweet bones of your plate and pack up whistling. The boys come home from school, find you gone. The year language buckled. This is the year of prosthetic empathy. The year Mariposa de la Muerte flies in and lands on the dictionary. What is the word for the torn lip of the horizon twitching under the yellow fist of the sun? This is the year of vacuuming the mattress, of suffering pests, of Morana's bright ministry, the year after which the cuckoo sings, after which from scratch. And I have two more poems left, if that's okay. The next one is titled Wild Wasting. And there are a couple of poems in this book that I wrote I was kind of collaborating with some visual artists. And during the pandemic, somebody organized here in Atlanta this project where several visual artists were paired with poets one-on-one, and we kind of discussed ideas about what we could be working with or working on, and just then kind of developed our own pieces in response to ideas that we shared. And the person that I was working with and I discussed a lot, because it was the pandemic, of course, we talked a lot about silence and sort of becoming kind of having a more different relationship with sound and silence in particular. In this poem, I mention Emine Sevgi Özdamar. She is a Turkish poet, novelist, screenwriter, actress, phenomenal person. She's Turkish and lives in Germany and writes in German. And the book has got an epigraph by her, which I'm not going to read, but that's the reference. And one of the reasons that I wanted to include her and mention her here is that I was really thinking a lot about people who write in their non-native language in a foreign country. And I wanted to just, I hate the word channel, but nothing else comes to mind. Just get into that headspace and think of other women that I was inspired by who kind of share that experience, not to compare myself to her. But that's just one reference you may want to, that I wanted to share with you. Wild wasting. Silence is a girl silenced. Sometimes she is a boy with a clean face. It is a glass of clear water and that which the river took. Silence is the man at his piano wondering why the soldier's song doesn't sound that sonorous on his instrument. Is the pen in my hand, almost. Snapdragons wilting in the vase. Room refuted by night. I dip my pen into the wet eye of the dark and take away its quiet. We tear silence out of dawns, rip its black silk with slippery cries of love. In the newspaper is Sunday. The city wears its favorite weather. In the mirror are memory, mouth, magnificence of sex. Silence is no absence. It's a man who left with a tail between his legs, and in that departure remained. Or raise your glass to the still syllable. Cheers, chin chin, nazdravlje, slonche, salud. Look, silence, an immigrant who never arrives home. Emine Sevgi Özdamar, sitting tongue-twisted in the city of Berlin. My great-grandpa tonguing oysters in Biloxi, quiet, the curved face of a leaf. Duct tape, bondage, and almonds taking trouble to bloom, and bitter bell fries. Our sleepy feet. A vesper to the strand of hair stuck to lips. Silence is a wild wasting, and we mutter silence, are we or still song? And I think we're down to the last poem. Yeah, so I'm gonna read a little, it's kind of a love poem. It's, where did oh, here it is. It's called Chromatics of Touch, and it's a poem about synesthesia, basically, or inspired by it. And in this particular case, it would be seeing images after being touched. Chromatics of Touch. At the end of touch, there is a bright winter. Acid green pines, displayed wings of branches, waxy filaments cancelled by fresh snow, as crisp and white as bows on a butcher's apron. A wheel of wind spins through, a roulette turned by an invisible hand rouses the woods into a snow riot, a call of disorder. What's happening in this bed? A kneeling, your opiate, steady grip pulling my hair. Our contours shifting into entanglements worthy of multiple bodies, and just like that, I'm every one of the three women in Fuseli's symplegma, suffering pleasure, an arrangement that resists the static of grief, your release into the darkness of my womb, that demolished room, pipes scraped, night and gravity in its place. Thank you so much, everybody, for patiently sitting through this. And I would really love to talk to you and to see your faces if that's cool.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Yeah, that was very beautiful.
Thank you.
And so anybody who has questions or even comments, you can either raise your hand with Zoom's raise hand feature, or you can put anything you'd like to say or ask in the chat and I'll try to read it in order. And while you're getting set up, I had a couple things that I hoped I'd have a chance to ask about. Well, one thing I wanted to ask about was the poem you wrote about color, the colored pencils.
Mm-hmm.
I found it really, really striking that it was all this kind of, the whole thing took place, among teenage girls, in a bathroom. And it was like it kind of had this quality of reverie. And then the last lines were about now, I believe. And the very last lines were mouth still watering, the very
Mm-hmm.
last words. And I found that so arresting because it was like this long reverie that I kind of expected to stay in the past. And right in the last three words of the poem, it sort of snapped it into the present. And it just happened so suddenly that I was very taken by that. And I'm not sure there's a question in there. I just thought it was really beautiful. But if you'd like to say anything about that, I'd love to hear it.
I had recently a funny realization. And as I was reading this poem, it was just sort of like another ripple of the same realization, if that makes sense. Well, I was reading this one and then the Wild Wasting one, which I wrote this collaboration with an artist. There was another one where I worked with another artist, not just me, a group of poets. And I realized that colors in particular and art imagery, just anything visual, can really get me going when it comes to writing. I don't know exactly why that is. And it's kind of funny because I never think of myself as somebody who loves color. Like my closet is like this. It's just all like, I need to like look carefully, like which black piece am I going to pull out? Oh, look, there's some stripes there. But I have this other poem as well that is not in this book, that is basically in response to these paintings by this woman who just made these like beautiful, colorful lines. And it just made me think of languages and stuff like that. I don't exactly know what it is. There's something about color in particular that almost I get a physical response to it. But I've also in the last few weeks picked up, I used to before starting to write poetry. And I came to poetry sort of later than a lot of people than I know. I worked as a painter and self-taught. My former husband was an art dealer, and I would always get the job of, fixing up little damages and touch-ups and stuff like that. And then I finally found like a roll of canvas and started going at them. And anyway, after that marriage ended, I sort of, at that point, was really starting to dedicate myself to poetry. So I took like a 10-year hiatus and did not paint. And also I used to paint these really large abstract acrylics that they would take so much space, and I live in a small space, and unless someone's going to like buy them, I didn't know what I would do with them. So all of this is to say, I have just in the last few weeks started picking up a little bit more painting again, but I'm teaching myself how to use paper and smaller sizes. But there is something to me about color and texture and poetry, all of that sort of works together. Again, not an answer because it's just kind of like a response to your comment, I guess.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's Rupert.
Chandra, did I see your hand? I see it went away, but
Yeah.
please.
Hi. Am I audible? I'm having trouble with my
Yes,
laptop.
we can hear
Okay.
you.
My question is that I really enjoyed all the poems. My question to Andrea is, I got the impression that she came to Germany and then here. I wonder if she writes in her own language. Like I came, but I came to America late. So
Mhm.
I'm also a writer, but I write easily in my own language. In fact, I'm a published author there.
Yeah.
So just a simple question.
Um, you were asking about the woman that I mentioned earlier?
Yes.
I'm not sure how much she writes in Turkish, but I do know that she is really well known for how would I say, changing the writing German the way Turkish immigrants use German language. So that she completely reordered and changed the way German books sound and look like, and totally messed around with standard German language. I know a lot of writers who write across languages and in multiple languages, but that's really beautiful that you do both.
Thank you. I really like the poem. So is it a book we can buy? I mean,
Yes, and you know what? A sad thing is, it's not. They're not. Emine Sevgi Özdamar. If you just, I can maybe send to Frank or Sean, and they can maybe email you, or you can reach out. Feel free to reach out to me as well directly, and I can give you her name. There are not a lot of books in English translation because she's notoriously difficult to translate. Because when somebody, like, it's almost like, from what I read, I don't understand. I skipped all my German classes. I was in school. I was learning German, and I was not a very good student of German. I was a better student of English. But from what I've read from translators is that she basically shreds the German language and then makes a collage out of it by putting a lot of Turkish words and these kind of, like, what do you call a new word, neologisms. I forget the word.
like a fusion, like a
Right, exactly, fusion. Yeah,
fusion. Yeah. I
right.
I do that sometimes in my English. I put our word, some of the little bit,
Yeah,
this fused.
yeah, but it makes the translators, job quite tricky. Um, so maybe that's the reason why we don't have an awful lot of her translations in English. But yeah, feel free to reach out, and I will give
Okay.
you titles.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rupert.
Yes, I just want to really um, com compliment you on the reading. It was so good, and the order of the poems was one of my big comments. Especially the Nastic, the poem that you began with. It set this intense tone, and so it's sort of like a bar that you have to keep. If you give us that much, that it's the opening, but then you did it. You did it each poem. I'm not trying to like praise you or anything, but
Yeah.
I'm just giving you the feedback that that's what you got going with this. As you're going to be doing a lot of readings, hopefully. So, and also that poem to your grandmother, I don't think I'd heard that before, but to her womb like a abandoned girl, and that was crazy. Anyway, I love you and thanks for
Thank
doing this.
you. Thank you. Rupert is a wonderful poet and writer. And yeah, that was my grandmother's death. Was the first that was the first time I actually experienced somebody close dying. So yeah, that one is kind of hard to forget.
But mostly I'm just saying the order that you got going is really strong.
Thank you. This means a lot because in the past, Rupert has showed up at my readings and then told me at the end that I was offered critiques like, this was too fast or this was too short. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rupert. I had something I noticed craft-wise in maybe two of the poems. It was very prominent, I think, in the first one, is the use of interjections. I think in the first poem it was like babe, baby, and it sort of intensified and got more frequent as that poem went on. And I really noticed that. And then I noticed maybe in the eighth or ninth poem you read, it went along, and then there was a line or maybe a stanza that started look. And I just think that in both cases, I think it has this immediacy. It really brings this immediacy, or this kind of like, it's like the poem is already talking to the reader, but now it's talking directly to the reader in some way, almost by name. I thought that
Yeah.
was really interesting. There's a Vonnegut book that begins just that way. Look, like, look, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time. I thought that was really interesting. I wondered if you had any reflections on that.
Yeah, I think that that is something that kind of came naturally to me. But there was one point where I was when I was studying for the final exams in my MFA program, that I was spending a lot of time with Matthew Arnold's poem Dover Beach. And it's a gorgeous poem. I used to remember it by heart, of course. I don't remember it. I wouldn't be able to now recall it so quickly. But near the end of that poem, he speaks to his beloved, the speaker, and he's like, look at this place outside. He pulls the curtain, the speaker does, and talks to her. And there's something about, well, first of all, that kind of direct address is just, to me, really, I love it. I don't know. I just really, really love it. And like you said, like, it really pulls me into it. And I caught myself doing that. And I wonder whether it's sort of like a memory of that poem. It's one of my favorites, personally. I don't do it on purpose. I don't set out to do it. It just sort of comes out. But I also kind of, sometimes it feels fun to sort of try to create this really intimate space within, like the world within the poem, so that it's not just like, hey, you over there, but it's like you're in this kind of very personal space. That's the plan, at least.
Yeah, I feel like, most poetry is vulnerable, I would say, um, in the sense that it just really reveals the author. I mean, that's the point. But I feel like it's a different thing to make a poem, to write poetry that's very, very intimate.
Mhm.
And I feel like your poetry tends to be very intimate. Like, I'm just, for whatever reason, thinking about T.S. Eliot, and like his poetry is very vulnerable. Like, you can really learn who he was, but he's not really inviting you into relationship with him in quite the same way. I feel like he's just sort of saying, it's like this, it's not so good here in the early 20th century. You're not really invited in, but in your poetry, I feel like it's like a lot of the moments that kind of, there's almost kind of like it slightly takes your breath away, that the intimacy is very sudden. And that's something I really feel very often in your poetry. It's sort of like like there's a slightly breathtaking quality of intimacy rather often. No?
Thank you. I think that Eliot is interesting to me. I remember once, well, just recently I was talking to my students about, the way that Eliot talked about the role of emotion and the role of tradition and personality of the poet and all of that, and how for him, it's like there's no need for new emotion. Basically, you just kind of we tap into the tradition of who we come from in our poetic lineage and so on and so forth. And I have and I don't agree or disagree at all, but what typically comes to mind when I think of that is always like, well, what about writing as a woman? I always felt like, or any person that feels does not quite, I mean, we are all part of a lineage of some kind, right? Even if we're brand new writers and have read very little, but it just feels like there's certain moments, and this is of course not just a point about women in particular, it's just it comes to me more easily as a woman, when you don't really feel like you're part of that traditional lineage, and that personal or intimate is your space. That's something that I kind of think of when I think of him as well.
So, questions or comments? Oh, Skinner, do you want to speak?
Yeah, I was actually going to just kind of follow up because we had a discussion in a writing group I was in, and it really was about, I had written an elegy, and it was, from the point of view, it was different. It was from first person, from the woman's point of view. And I was kind of wondering, how often do you speak in someone else's voice? And, how might you create the empathy? How would you do that if you do that in any of your poetry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like I'm not very loyal to my own voice to begin with. Like I will take from memory, I will take from my own personal experiences, but I'm not very loyal to like me. If that makes sense. I'll explain now. I'm always a little bit confused when people talk about like being true to yourself, being true to your own voice, and so on and so forth. And why I'm a little bit confused by it, because I feel like I have been a lot of different people in my life, and at any given moment, there's just like we have different facets of our personas and personalities and so on and so forth. So I feel like, yeah, I've got a lot of voices in my head. I'm not deranged or anything like that, but I could be. So in some ways, I just pick from memory what moves me initially, but very much the end product is, artificial. It's not true to me, where I feel like I can take personally a little bit more liberty in just inhabiting other people's or imagine people's points of view is mostly in like short prose or flash fiction or something like that. Gives me a little bit more space. And I think that the reason for that is, and I don't write a lot of it, and I'm still kind of like baby steps, but I think the reason for it is because I am so used to writing these sort of intimate poems, so for me, it's like, okay, let me just kind of mess around with a different form, and that will allow me to kind of get out of this narrow space that I'm used to inhabiting in poetry. And there I am happy to be, very different people. And I kind of really love doing that. I like doing a lot of different stuff because it keeps me from getting bored with my own work.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
But you ruined my second question.
Oh,
I'm just kidding, because no, I was just going to ask, when it really comes to showing like imagery and metaphor, showing or telling, like, what do you feel in your voice? What do you feel is more important in a poem when you use imagery and metaphor? Are you trying to show and you want the person to see the image and visualize the image to come up with a thought? Or are you really hoping that the thought, that the metaphor really springs the thought that you have behind it, right? Because there really is two different approaches, right?
Yeah, I've always, when I write initial first drafts, usually I will have, this is just for first drafts, it doesn't work with revisions, but I will usually have some music playing, something that I really am into at the time. And I will play that on repeat constantly. So it's almost like a shortcut to get me into the headspace that I need to be in, and to kind of like quickly remember the mood that I was trying to create. And in that space, when I'm first writing, I don't think logically at all. It's all impressions and imagery and sort of some kind of thread of logic, but it's pretty thin. So I think initially I'm very much led by imagery and mood and tone and so on and so forth. And then during revision, I kind of, make sure that there's enough some kind of structure and logic working in the poem. But the other thing that might also work, be the reason for that, is that I've kind of learned early on that there are some benefits to writing in a non-native language. And that is when you can't recall quickly what that thing is, what it's called, or a phrase for something, you automatically, especially when you're kind of pressed for time, you don't want to forget something, like whatever that thing is, you come up with alternatives. And oftentimes those alternatives might be images or metaphors and something like that. My mom is kind of, and it's not just my mother. I noticed that a lot of people who don't have college education, who have not been sort of trained to think in this very organized fashion, who are not trained to always think about language specificity, tend to be a little bit more playful with language. And I really treasure that, and I love that, and I kind of steal that every time I can. I don't know if this is helpful to you, but yeah, I mean, I kind of start with just like bits and bobs and kind of try to work with those.
No, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, following up from that, you talked about there not being a precise word for something, and then you maybe use an image, and maybe that's better. And actually, one of my favorite moments in the poems you read was, I'm heavily paraphrasing, but it's like, what do you call like the quivering lip of the horizon, like under like something like a burning sun, something like that. And I just thought, I don't know, it's like as you were saying the words, for some reason, I just saw very visually, I guess, the horizon, and it felt like it was maybe shimmering with heat, and then the sun was above it, maybe in the late afternoon. And it's like, yeah, what do you call that? You know? And it's like, I guess it just feels like it very aligned with what you just said, that you could find the exact word for that if there is one. You know, mirage, the mirage effect or whatever, but like
Right.
the thing itself and the way it looks in your mind is maybe much more powerful.
Right. Yes, thank you. There is a comment or a question here.
But yeah, from Kimberly. I love that idea that when you write in a non-native language and can't remember the word, yeah, you use a metaphor or image instead.
It's a necessity. It's a necessity, especially if you tend to be a little bit spaced out by nature. You just have to. But yeah, you know, and the other thing is also, I think it's important, well, for me, but for, you know, what the poets do, they play with language. And I think it's important to keep that element of play and fun in that, even when we're writing about things that are difficult or sad or, you know, complicated, that needs to be there. So if, you know, if which is not to say that people can't use very dry language, for lack of a better word. There's documentary poetry that does this very successfully, but the idea there is that we can't be too married to the way we typically speak. We have to be able to kind of just rip the language apart a little bit and rearrange it like a collage and play with it. That's the fun part, I think, personally. Thank you, Chandra.
Oh, here's from Michelle. Oh yeah, one of my favorite lines was in the first poem, even dandelions lose their head at night. I love this. Thank you for sharing.
That's how I learned the word nastic, because you know how dandelions are open during the day, and at night you wouldn't, like if you walk by a field of dandelions, you wouldn't even know that there are any dandelions. They just kind of like, everything is green, they just collapse. And so then at that time I was with somebody walking down and I was like, look at these dandelions, lions lost their heads. And I was like, they do look kind of like, not to be morbid, I don't mean headless as in their heads were cut off, but more like, you know, you lost your head over this. But thank you.
So if anyone would like to ask maybe one final question, we have time. Okay, yeah, let's have this from Amy be the last one. Personal effects uses interesting spacing and form. Can you comment on your use of space?
Thanks, Amy. Let me pull it up if I can. Oh, here it is. So is this poem? The poem looks like a column. And what I had in mind is basically a column of people who were going up this narrow path in the woods. They were leaving their villages and places, and basically running away with whatever belongings they could take last minute. There's something about that visual, but at the same time, I wanted the poem to look like a newspaper article as well, because that column is the same. And this idea of, you know, how do we remember war, the public memory of war, what we say, what about these people, what about these individuals, their personal life stories, how, if they're ever mentioned, and oftentimes they're not, they might get a little space in a column. That was sort of like the obsessive, not maybe obsessive, but that was constantly on my mind as I was writing that poem. And I really wanted it to be like a column. And I find myself writing a lot of poems of this kind these days. There's something about the constriction of space that I don't know, just kind of fascinated by at the moment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, Andrea, thank you again. And everyone, today is the official launch day of In Another Country. So I'm going to put the link into the Zoom chat here. We'll also send you a follow-up email, but please, please buy a copy. And Amy already has, so she is aware that there's been really thoughtful use of the physical space on the page. So absolutely another dimension of the poetry. So please pick that up. And also Andrea has a course, Sing the Body Electric. It's a course on the way that the body can be a font of creativity in our poetry writing. That's starting next week. So if you're at all interested in that vein of poetry writing, as you know, it's going to be a really magnificent course. So please check that out. I'll put that in the chat as well. So Andrea, thank you. Any last words before we pause for tonight?
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. I know that you know, everybody's time is valuable, especially Friday night. I really appreciate Fred and Sean, who thoughtfully suggested this, and everybody, my sincere thanks. And I hope you have a really beautiful weekend.
Thank you, Andrea. You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.